All right, folks, we are officially here with our online training, and we've got some North American Camel Ranch Owners Association business quickly that we want to address before we get to our guests. A reminder, we've got the Flint Hills Camel Trek near Manhattan, Kansas, May 13, 14, 15. August 28, 29, 30, it's the Great Plains Camel Clinic at Camelot Dairy in Colorado. And of course, October 23, 24, 25, it's the 18th annual Southwest Camel Conference and Training Clinic near Las Vegas. Please reach out to Secretary General Valerie Crenshaw if you'd like to join any of those. Registration is open on a couple of those. The Vegas event registration has not yet opened, but these are three big association related or sponsored events that folks need to be aware of. So, welcome everyone. I'm Doug Baum, Education Chair for North American Camel Ranch Owners Association and host for these quarterly online trainings. These trainings are typically for NACROA members only as a membership perk, but we are so thrilled about having today's guest. We knew we wanted this presentation available live for as many folks as possible. This meeting, as are all NACROA trainings, will be recorded for folks to access after the fact. So a reminder, please, to everybody, mute your microphones during the meeting. Our presentation will be an informal Q&A today, so please be familiar with the workings of Zoom so that you can unmute yourself when you have a question. There's a really handy raise your hand feature in Zoom. Please familiarize yourself with that. It's helpful for us to see if someone's got a question as we move through the presentation. And you can certainly send questions in the chat if you'd prefer to have me ask them too. So now on to our guest. Richard Bulliet is a professor emeritus of Middle Eastern history at Columbia University who specializes in the history of Islamic society and institutions, the history of technology, and the history of the role of animals in human society. It's this last part, the role of animals in human society, that brings Dr. Bulliet to our meeting today, specifically camels. Any camel owner or scientist working with camels who's done their homework knows Dr. Bulliet's book, The Camel and the Wheel, and in fact, virtually anything written on camels in the last 50 years includes this book in the bibliography. Welcome, Dr. Bulliet.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here. I never heard of this organization before, so this is a real treat for me.
We are a young association. It's a livestock advocacy association, not dissimilar from, say, the Angus Association or any other livestock breed association for advocacy for that breed or species. So it's understandable that you may not have heard of us. We really got our legs under us during COVID. But we're working, we're very active. We've got over 80 members, many of whom are with us today virtually or will be hopefully enjoying the presentation after the fact. But let's dig right into it. Doctor, the camel and the wheel, and in fact, your life's work covers so much camel territory. We feel like we could host you alone quarterly for years in order to give this subject full attention, particularly given this audience today made up of camel owners and scientists working in the field of camel research. But there's one passage early in The Camel and the Wheel that I want to dig right into. And hey folks, if you could, let's make sure that we're muting, s'il vous plaît, and microphone. Let's make sure that we're muting microphones, folks. So Dr. Bulliet, we've got this passage. It's in the Apologia, which I think is an apt location for it. It says, these are your words, I do not love camels. I was not reared among them. I've never even been intimately acquainted with one. A 45-minute ride in Tunisia was sufficient to show me how long it takes a non-rider to get sore that way. Doctor, did I not fully enlighten you as to whom you'd be speaking with today?
Well, I figure that you people collectively and even individually have had a lot more experience with camels than I have, but I know something about the history.
Hands down, you do, and it's not just this fine work. Um, a lot of your work through the studies of Middle Eastern history lands you kind of squarely at the feet, if not on the back of literally a camel. Why has a camel been so central to so much of your work?
I can tell you in a very broad sense, if you look at the what I call the arid zone from basically the coast of Morocco and Mauritania eastward to Beijing, where you go across and you have to shift a little bit north to get into the Bactrian territory. But in that area, um, you develop a camel caravan economy that is the only time in history that you, prior to the railroad, that you had a means of transportation uh, for people and for goods that um, that was overland instead of maritime. And that makes a huge difference because uh, once you can have internal connections in Eurasia, your face has disappeared here.
I'm still very much here, Doctor. You
Okay,
continue on. The audio is fantastic. I may
okay,
work through the group to mute a few folks as we go, but please continue. You're talking about
okay.
overland trade with camels.
Yes. So you had from basically from really the early Islamic period down until roughly 1600 or so. You had a world, basically a Eastern Hemisphere network of camel caravan trading that was superior to maritime trading, and it's superior. Not it's the cost is about the same, but the structure of the economic system is very different if you're overland with animals as opposed to simply shipping goods down to a seaport and putting them on a boat. And that um, the question is why this was so successful. And I think there are uh, a couple of basic reasons. Um, one of them is that, as you people know, it takes several years before a camel is of an age and growth to be used for carrying substantial loads. Usually, it's given as 5 years. Uh, that means that for 5 years, the cost of breeding and rearing the animals is upon the animal provider, not upon the caravan operator. And so the important thing was to have the lowest cost for rearing the animals, that which means they go into deserts and into wastelands. Now, you probably don't do that now because you don't need to have that sort of economy. But if you compare camels with elephants, an elephant, there are no domestic elephants. All elephants that we consider domestic are actually caught in the wild and then tamed, because to rear an elephant for 12 years before you can use it for labor is simply prohibitively expensive. So the camel is the largest animal with the longest rearing period that you can actually afford to train, you know, breed it and raise it to the point where you can use it. And that means that the areas where the camel caravan system operated have to be areas in which there's a substantial amount of land that is wasteland. And you have to have people who are dedicated to exploiting the wasteland for the rearing of camels. And that means that basically you have nomads, because in order to make best use of that rangeland, you have to cover a very large area because the vegetation is so sparse. So the result is that the camel caravan network is dependent upon various populations that are living in wasteland or adjacent to wastelands, and that are paying attention to the breeding and rearing of the animals. And that means that whenever the European colonialists tried to export camel use to any other part of the world, they failed, because they never really grasped the idea that the economy came from raising the young animals on the wasteland and then using them when they get to a usable age. And so that meant that all the entire political structure had to be predicated upon the idea that the economic structure for the civilization was a structure that had to tolerate nomads. So when you get to the modern period, one of the first things that sort of defines modernism in this region is to try and settle the nomads or destroy the culture of the nomads. And it's not simply because they dislike nomads, but they see them as they don't pay taxes, they don't recognize international boundaries, and they say, well, that's contrary to the idea of nation states living within fixed boundaries that you have ever since the Treaty of Westphalia in the 17th century. And so the result is that that the development of what we think of as a modern society required the elimination of the nomads, and that jeopardized the entire system that had made the region incredibly successful for hundreds of years. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that those people who raise the animals in this fashion have to see the animal, the having the animals is their wealth. This is very unlike a ranching situation with cattle, for example, where the return, the wealth comes from selling the animal parts or selling live animals. But the camel people have to be devoted to the rearing of the animals and seeing after their needs, and then they can rent them or sell them to caravan operators when they get of a usable age. Now, this system, I call it actually a mode of production, sort of like a Marxist mode of production, the camel caravan mode of production. That one element is the necessary tolerance of nomads living in wasteland and rearing animals. The other part of it is that there's a curious thing in all European folklore and most folklore elsewhere in the world. You have stories about sailing, seafaring stories, Sinbad the Sailor and so forth. And but you don't have caravan stories. You have Westerners who ride in a caravan will write about it. But the people who are actually operating the camel caravans did not produce a huge body of folklore. We just don't have caravan stories, even in certain story collections which use caravans. They always have the focus of each anecdote is in a city, not on the road. Now, I think I wondered about this for a long time because it involves two things. One is, who are the road people? We know who the nomads are, and we've had very good anthropological work about a lot of camel nomad societies. And we know who the merchants are, because they've left a certain amount of correspondence, and there's the physical evidence, things they tracked with. But we don't know much about the roadies. Who were the people who actually were out there pulling the camels and loading them, unloading them, taking care of the needs of the paying customers who are going with them. And we don't know who these people are historically. Your organization includes these people, but historically we don't know who these people were, except that they're all Muslims historically. Now, and that's curious because at the time that Islam comes along, camels have become central to the caravan economy of the Arab Middle East and Egypt, and to a lesser degree in North Africa along the coast under late Roman stuff. But you did not have camel caravans in Pakistan, in India, in Turkmenistan, in Uzbekistan, and the ones on the south side of the Sahara Desert. You had very robust camel societies in Mali and Niger, places like that, Chad, and of course Somaliland, whatever we call it. And so you actually have a huge expansion. And I figure that the area that the one hump camel caravan serviced expanded to about triple its size at the beginning of Islam, to triple that size 400 years later. So with Islam, even though it doesn't say anything about camel caravans, it spreads an economic structure that does not necessarily involve Arabs, because the people in Pakistan and in India and Afghanistan, so forth, they're not Arab camel breeders, but they're people who adopted camels after the rise of Islam. So there's this de facto connection between camels and being Muslims. But there's another thing. Why don't the roadies talk about their life? Or maybe they do and I simply haven't found it yet. But I think one of the reasons is that every sea lane in the world has a seafloor that is littered with boats, because boats sink. And so much of the lore of the sea has to do with the fear of sinking, the fear of drowning, the fear of monsters in the deep. And that's a very realistic fear, because you never know until the ship pulls into harbor. You never know whether it has made it through the dangers of the road. But nobody writes about the caravan disappeared. It's safe compared to seafaring. And I think that meant that people were more willing to travel on something that was as commonplace as a caravan, and yet they never really recognized that this is central to their entire economy. So, from my point of view, the evolution of the disappearance of the wheel and the rise of the camel caravan, which I write about in the book, actually, if you then go beyond what I have in the book, you get this whole economic political structure. And actually, I published a book 2 years ago that talks about that. And so this, nobody's reading it because it's an obscure publication, but it's called Exploring Animal Energy in the Arid Zone. And it talks a lot about this expansion of the caravan network, so that you can go from Morocco to Beijing essentially with Muslim camel caravan operators. But it also talks about one other thing that affects camels that has not really been pointed out, and that is the hybridization and the the cross between the one and the two hump camels, which is apparently there already before the rise of Islam a little bit, but it doesn't become really important until, after the year 1000. And then where it becomes important is in the north, so that to this day, the tremendous amount of camel research being done in Kazakhstan. And that has, a lot of it has to do with hybridizing one and two hump camels. And because they're very interested there in maximizing milk yields. And the hybrid produces milk in a different pattern than the ordinary camels. And you also have it developed less so in Turkey, but in Turkey and at one point in Afghanistan and Northwest India, you had camel wrestling. And the animals that engage in camel wrestling are all hybrids. They're not one hump, they're not two hump, they're called a bukht, or in Arabic, and different things in different languages. And you actually had camels, hybrid camels up in Eastern Europe that are written about but no longer remembered. So there's just a lot of questions still to be resolved on the history of it. But as far as I know, I'm sort of it.
It's fascinating, Dr. Bulliet. You have essentially here in 15 minutes synopsized the camel and the wheel, which for many of us is a bit like a Bible. I know you didn't intend on this book being a how-to guide on camel saddlery, but this camel owner in Texas absolutely took that from it. I do want to hit on a point that you mentioned about there not being any chronicles of caravanning, where we've got the tales of Sindbad and there are sea shanties, right, written about life on board ships. But with there being no chronicles of caravanning, I would love to explore this with you. As you place the spread of the camel within the context of the spread of Islam, could it be that many of these nomadic people, marginalized, perhaps illiterate, may simply have had only the oral tradition, which limits the broadcast and the scope of folklore or folk tales? And the other piece of this being something that I have long thought might be true about Islam and the individual Muslim, him or herself, is the deflection of any light being shown on the individual. That, so many phrases in Arabic are collective. Salamu alaikum being peace be upon you in the plural, not a singular. A compliment given to an individual Arabic speaking Muslim would not be met with a thank you, I'm awfully proud of my office, but rather simply Alhamdulillah, thanks be to God.
Yes.
So maybe do we have a lower occurrence of chronicles of caravanning because it was simply taboo within the culture to shine a light on the individual? How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think that would be as important as certain other factors. I assume that in every major entrepot where the caravans would come and go, that you had a kind of floating population of people who were not resident there, but were waiting for the next caravan. And that you had a little bit like what you would have in seaports, where you'd have a floating population of able-bodied seamen who sometimes would be drafted into the army or kidnapped, but otherwise they would wait for the next, you would ship out.
Hmm.
The European lore, which is about seafaring, and the Indian Ocean lore that I've read into, um, uh, identifies these people, but usually through an author who is not one of them. In other words, the tales of Sinbad may be about Sinbad, but they're not by Sinbad. They're, I mean, whoever wrote them and copied them down was inventing this character who would be part of that folklore tradition. Um, the another factor is what language was used in the caravan, and I've invented a term, lingua caravana. It's sort of like lingua franca. Lingua franca was the Romance tongue used for the Mediterranean maritime trade, but the lingua caravana, and I don't think there's just one. I think what you would use in Iran and Iraq would be different from what you would use if you're going from Hausa speaking areas in Mali, going up to the coast of Tunisia and Algeria. So with the lingua caravana, there's a question of what language would you have this lore in if you were going to go and search for it? Because I think partly a matter is, who has ever really interrogated these people who worked in this trade? I mentioned in the book, I believe, a group in Arabia, Saudi Arabia, who are called the Beni Uqail. And the Beni Uqail were camel buyers. They did not belong to a separate tribe, even though they were called Beni Uqail, and there was actually an Uqailid state at one point. But they're called the Beni Uqail, and they would travel throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and they would buy camels. And it was understood that in the raiding between tribes for stealing camels, and nobody could steal from the Beni Uqail, because the Beni Uqail were buying camels, and it was a selective, way. It was a way of getting cash into the hands of the tribes. So during World War One, the British made a agreement with Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who was the sort of rising monarch in Riyadh, didn't yet control all that much of Arabia, but they gave him money with the understanding that he would distribute that money to the tribes. But in return, the tribes would not sell camels to the Ottoman army. And if you look at the collective value of that you can collect from British intelligence reports at that time, and you see how much money the camels were worth in the places like Yemen and Basra and Damascus, where they were being sold to users. You really find that the British successfully bought out that a lot of that trade. Then when the war ended, the British had the question, would they continue to give a financial subvention to King Abdulaziz or not? And they decided they would. And this is how the Saudi royal family became the center of the polity for so much of the peninsula, because they were the ones who were handing out cash. And because the marketing of the animals was very much disrupted in the course of the war, and never really came back in a robust fashion after the war. And this is one of the reasons. And so there's this question of, I gave a talk on this many, many years ago in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, at a conference. And I wouldn't say it was a very successful talk, but afterwards, a man came up to me and he said, you must continue this research. And he said, I'm one of the Beni Ukhayl.
Mm.
And you're the only person who's ever expressed an interest in what we were, because we don't do it. We don't have that same status now that we had back before Abdulaziz came along. So one reason we don't have a folklore is that we haven't had anyone who's gone out and collected it. Now, for so much of the folklore that you have for maritime is musical and or lexicographic, where people want to identify phrases connected with that. And the music throughout the Middle East, I don't know so much about Central Asia, but throughout the Middle East and North Africa, musicians tend to be itinerant. And I suspect
Everywhere in the world.
yeah, and I think that every caravan had a contingent of people who were traveling along as singers and dancers and musicians. And I don't think the ethnomusicologists have focused on that aspect of musical itinerancy, but it's an important factor. So it may be that the lore is there, but that we haven't had someone like the people who collected Appalachian ballads or Scottish ballads. We haven't had anyone like that who has made it a career to go out and see what can still be recovered. So it may be that all the lore is there, and we simply haven't found it.
That's a fantastic explanation, and I think with so much science and so much research, a really kind of low-hanging fruit summation can always be greater study is needed, right? And I do want to revisit a earlier point I made. I don't want to misspeak or sound disparaging about Islam and Muslims, nomads being illiterate. I think we all recognize, even in the 19th century, the majority of folks on the North American continent were illiterate as well,
Oh, yeah.
functionally. But as I'm not a Muslim, I shouldn't speak for Islam. We do have attendees who are Muslim, one of whom is our Yemeni colleague, Majid Naji, now living in Morocco. So, Majid, I would ask if you have any insights to add on this topic, maybe add them in the chat so that we can read them and be able to enlighten ourselves afterward. Majid is a wonderful member of our international camel community and would have insights, I think, that would inform all of us. Now,
Good.
Doctor, your life's work being animals in society. I recognize this might be a little bit out of your scope of expertise, but if we are looking at the North American continent itself, and I'm not talking Protolopus or the 30 million year old
Right.
camel progenitors, but when our own government imported camels into the US in the 1850s, happens to be my area of specialization, I have long thought that some of the points you've brought up about not importing the culture or that generational knowledge, could that have been circumvented had the Spanish 500 years ago, along with horse and donkey and cattle, had also imported camels? Perhaps our nomadic indigenous tribes out west could have adopted the camel, and then we might have seen a greater camel culture on this continent. Is it pure folly to even think this way?
One of the areas that is poorly developed is the role of the camel in Muslim Spain. You don't have the huge wastelands in Spain that you would have in the Sahara Desert and so forth. And you have such a short distance over Gibraltar if you want to import camels. And so when the Moahedun or the Murabatun, when they invaded from Morocco, I think they brought their animals with them. But you don't hear much about breeding of camels in Spain. I found references to hunters who would hunt camels in early 20th century and in Spain. But I don't think that you had a robust culture in Spain. For one thing, Spain retains in the Christian areas, it retains um, uh, carts and wagons, particularly two-wheeled carts, and carts of a rather primitive design. In other words, we using wheel sets instead of individually rotating wheels, and that's in Portugal and Spain. So I don't think that the conquistador class, if you can use that term, had a familiarity with a robust caravan culture in Spain to try and import them. But there were efforts to import in northern Brazil, in desert areas in northern Brazil. But you even had places like Java, people would try and import camels, and British Columbia, two-hump camels. But I think that they didn't catch on to the need to have people familiar with breeding. If you look at the American experiment of the 1850s, and you look at the people, that Haji Ali was the leading camel wrangler, but he was Greek Orthodox by birth, and he made the pilgrimage to Mecca. That's why he's called Haji, and so on. But of the identifiable wranglers that we know by name, they were all Greeks, and I think that this had to do with the officers that went to the Mediterranean and bought camels to bring them back to Texas.
Without a doubt.
I don't think that they connected with any tribes. I think that they connected with the sort of seaport camel caravan roadie types and he found some that they would bring back. I think they brought back Christians because they really preferred them to Muslims, but also may have been easier to find someone who could translate into English from that. Greeks were very useful as translators between Turkish and Arabic and English. So that is something that I think regrettably contributed to the failure of that experiment, but also the fact that Jefferson Davis was the Secretary of War who started it. Nobody really wanted to go and after the Civil War and say, hey, Jeff Davis really had some good ideas. The Confederacy was not one of them.
Yeah, agreed. I think the camels are the baby thrown out with the bathwater there post Civil War.
Yeah.
And do you think too that these Western exploits by Spain, these happen on the heels of the changing of the guard there in Andalusia with the expulsion of Muslims and Jews in southern Spain. There's now a very strongly assertive Christian monarchy in Spain, and it's under those times that the movements west, particularly to the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America, are done by the Spanish, and the camels, particularly to the Spanish of that time, let's say 1492, the camel represents the vanquished foe.
Well, it was not vanquished. They were still fighting them.
Well,
I mean,
certainly. We've got this transition period. Maybe some could argue that it's still happening today. But in those times, wouldn't you agree that the camel to the Spanish represented Islam, represented the Moors, if you will? And
I
they're
think it's very possible.
okay,
Um,
fantastic.
I've done a fair amount of research on the Spaniards going into the southern Philippines
Yeah.
and transferring the word Moro from Morocco to the southern Philippines. So then you had the
Mm.
Moro Wars, and the Spaniards were determined to wipe out the Muslims, so that they were there from about the same length of time as the Muslims, because Islam comes late to the Philippines. But if you look at this period of, say, 1300 to 1900, when you have uh, combat between Spaniards and Moros in the Philippines, there are only there are fewer than 50 manuscripts of the Quran that survive, uh, because the Spaniards burned them all, and they were militant. And you had um, the odd thing was that the Spanish Inquisition had an office in Manila, um, but they prohibited they were prohibited from uh, from putting anyone on trial um, for blasphemy, for being a crypto Muslim or Christian or crypto Jew. They're forbidden from doing that, um, because only a Spaniard could be a turncoat. The Moros, you could not force them. Besides, conversion was the office of the Dominicans, and not of the Inquisition. So the Inquisition officials in Manila wrote to Mexico City, where the Inquisition was primarily settled, again and again, saying, "Can't we force the locals to convert?" And they said, "No, no, you can't do it."
Mm.
Very, very strange Spanish. Um, Nobody really compares what they do in the Philippines with what they're doing in Mexico or Peru, but it's a very interesting story.
Well, it absolutely is, and your acknowledgement of the linguistic transference from one people to another really, I think, exemplifies how old enmities can take a long
Yeah.
time to die. Well, listen, as we look at the clock here, we've got about a quarter hour left, and we have an illustrious group of attendees here. You had mentioned Haji Ali, someone that, of course, American camel owners are all going to be familiar with. But one of our attendees, Darim Taba, had actually raised his hand and asked about Haji Ali. Darim, my friend, did the doctor address that fully enough for you? Have you got something else you'd like to add?
Good evening. It's evening now in Damascus, and I would like to greet all of you. It was very interesting topic. Thank you, Mr. Bullet. Yani the idea and the description of the whole history is fantastic. I would like just to mention something about Haj Ali or
Mhm.
Haj Ali.
Yeah.
I think you know that after 1820, I think after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, many Muslim Greek people were deported to Syria and to the Ottoman Empire, ex
Yes.
Ottoman Empire. Many of them are located now in Syria and are Syrians. And I think
Mhm.
Hajjuri was one of them. He was Syrian, originated from Greek, and mostly he could be from Crete. By the way, I had a visitor from Crete to Syria, and I took him to one of the villages on the coast of Syria. And he spoke the language of 1820 with those people who are Syrian, originated from
Oh,
Greece. This is a nice
oh,
Mhm.
story.
That's
The
very
other
interesting.
thing, camels, I'm camel lover. You know, I just came back from Hama today and I was at the faculty teaching my student about camels and camel diseases and it's very interesting. We have a case of Pika. So I think the history of the camels in Syria is still not written in a good way. When you go to the Damascus Museum, when you go to other museums, you found a lot of historic monuments of camels. Some of them is described, and many of them has either stolen or not recognized internationally. So I hope the situation in Syria will be soon very good. We have very good relation now with the USA. So maybe the next meeting for the camel breeders, camel lovers, will be in Damascus or in Hama in my faculty. Welcome of all of you.
Inshallah.
I will collect all
Inshallah.
the camels which I have.
Yeah.
But
The actually
until
the
that,
best
maybe we can organize a virtual meeting with my colleagues in Hama and students. I can bring also somebody to translate for you that we have a kind of a conversation with our expert. I can invite also some camel breeders. By the way, what you call camel breeder or the people who are dealing every day with the camels, they are interesting people, very interesting people. They are very intelligent. They spoke with the camels. They kiss the camels. I have
yeah.
many cases where the breeder said, "Hi, long time I didn't see you. Come and kiss me." And she come to him and kiss him. Yani, it's amazing. It's amazing. I don't like to
And
take
it's
too long
and
time.
it's
I just, yes, please go on.
the an important thing here is that love of the camel. When you had the Europeans who tried to take camels elsewhere, they did not have that close connection. They did not see them as likable animals very much. So that I interviewed a man who during World War I had been a camel wrangler for the campaign across Suez, Allenby's camel trains that were supplying the British Army in Palestine. And he said the most important thing that he would tell people when they came to drive the camels for him is that they should always carry an axe handle with them. And if a camel misbehaved, you should hit them very hard between the eyes. And he said the result was we had a lot of blind camels. But a blind camel could be tied in a string, and it was just as good on the caravan as a camel that could see. And I thought, well, the brutality to the animal it didn't mean anything to him. It was whereas you hear during World War I, people who talk about the affection between officers and their horses, and how they were very psychologically destroyed by having so many horses killed and eaten and so on. But it sounds like you still have a lively camel culture in Syria. I'm glad to hear about it.
Shukran, ya Ustaz Dharam. We appreciate you
Yeah,
chiming in.
yeah. Unfortunately, the number has been decreased so much, but we are now working on it again to bring all camel breeders together. And this year we have a good rainfall, so I think many of the camels will be breed well. So for the next meeting.
Inshallah. I know that we've already gotten some interest in that from our esteemed colleague, Dr. Ilse Kolaralefson in India. She's already chimed in the chat that she would very much support an in-person gathering in Damascus. So I think no one would argue with that. Again, I'd love to open this up to other folks. We have folks with incredible camel experience, both practical with ownership and from a science perspective. Not only camel owners here in the U.S., but folks abroad. Again, we've clearly got attendees today from Syria, from India, from Kenya, and Morocco, as well as many U.S. states. Dr. Ilse has raised her hand. I cede my time to Dr. Ilse. Welcome, Doctor.
Okay. No, thanks so much. No, I'm so excited to see Dr. Bulliet in person, because I also wrote my PhD dissertation on the domestication of the camel, and the camel and the wheel was, I mean, the guiding light for me. Now, that book was written, I mean, quite some time ago, before a lot of archaeological evidence
Yes.
became available mostly from the United Arab Emirates and from Oman. And I'm just wondering, so in your book, you not speculate, but you presume that the camel was domesticated for milk in the south of Arabia, and then from there it was moved to across the Bab el Mandab to what's now
Somalia.
Somalia, no? Yeah, and have you, with all these new archaeological materials coming alight, have you revised like your thinking about camel domestication?
Um, I read about a lot of discoveries and so forth, and uh, I still think that about 3000 BC is the right time frame. But it's the reasons for domestication. I have uh, revised my thinking somewhat. I wrote a book, Hunters, Herders, and Hamburgers, that is about my theories of domestication. And so that was substantially later than the camel and the wheel. So I have some different ideas there. And most recently, I've been interested in the discovery that that you had crossbreeding between domestic donkeys and wild Syrian onagers. That genetically they've now found that they definitely have a cross, and the animal is called a kunja, and that's the first hybrid work animal that has ever developed. And the kunjas lasted, I think, for like 1,000 years, leaving almost nothing tangible behind. But that sets up a pattern where all of the domestic working animal that are hybrids, the kunja, the mule, the bucht, the cross between the two camel species, and the zo, the cross between the yak and the cow. All of these are in the arid zone, and all of them have to be substantial industries because you have to breed the animals from the crossbred parents in each generation. And I think that nowhere else in the world did anyone ever develop a hybrid working animal. And that I think hybridizing is something that, and selective breeding, I think is something that that you find all the way across from Morocco and Mauritania to Tibet, that you have this notion that working animals should be or could be useful if they were hybrids. And so the question of the hybridizing of 1 and 2 camels gets into the question of which was domesticated first, the 2-1 or the 2 camel. And I think that there's been some argument that the 2 camel may have been earlier than the 1 camel and have been borrowed across the Strait of Hormuz into Arabia.
Exactly, yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we've always assumed that somehow Arabia would be first, but I think there's getting to be indication that it was the other way around.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is actually the latest thinking, that the domestication of the one-hump camel in what's now the Emirates was inspired maybe by the domestication of the two-hump camel. But what I find really interesting and what I only realized very recently is that so the first mention of the dromedary camel in writing, it's referred to as the donkey of the sea in Sumerian text, and I'm realizing now that apparently, I mean, they were hunted almost practically to extinction the one-hump camel, and it was probably in the mangroves where they couldn't run very fast. And there's this one site called Tel Abrak it's in the Emirates, and yeah, and so in the Iron Age, the camel basically it almost disappears. It's practically gone, and then it comes back in a domesticated state. So there was apparently mass hunting of wild dromedaries in the mangroves.
Well, I think that you have as the last ice age sort of peters out after 5,000 BC, and you get the opening up of the deserts in Sahara and in the Arabian Peninsula. I think that preserved the camels in Arabia, but not in the Sahara. So that some people have argued there were always wild camels in the Sahara, and I don't think that's true.
No.
But you're right. I think that they had it was an animal that was its only real protection was to flee into a environment that did not have any predators, and the humans were predators in any environment they went to, and I think that's very possible that they were near extinction. But then the desert got larger, and there was more space for them to find as a refuge. But mangrove swamps would be I remember that I found this book talking about hunting in southern Spain and how they would hunt in mangrove swamps there to find the remnant, the feral camels left from the Muslim period.
Yeah.
But there's a lot, and I don't follow things as closely now as I did 50 years ago.
Ilse, are you satisfied with that exchange between you and the good doctor?
Yes. Give somebody else a chance. Yes. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. I would like to open it up if anybody else has any other questions or thoughts. We don't have anything listed in the chat, so I will assume if nobody else has raised their hand or enabled their microphones, I think that everyone seems satisfied. And Doctor, you referenced that you're not as active as you once were 50 years ago, but I would argue you're fairly prolific. You sent me something that you've worked on recently. My takeaway at this point has been the economics of the caravan culture. How recently did you write what you had shared with me, and is that available anywhere for others to enjoy?
Yeah, there's a book called Exploring Animal Energy in the Arid Zone from the University of Leiden, University of Amsterdam Press, or whatever it is. And it is it's a short book that is much too expensive in my view, but it really represents ideas that I've put together in the last 10 years. In other words, since I turned 75. I mean, I'm now 85, and I've done this in the last 10 years. So I can't walk across the room without falling down, but I can still read and write.
And we are lucky for that. I think any one of us here could probably talk at length about what your work has meant to us, be it practical, be it scientific and research based. The reaction we had to the just the offering of this presentation indicates to us that there is still respect, reverence, and affinity for all of the work that you've done, and we can't thank you enough for taking the time to join with us, to share your thoughts, your perspectives, to take the questions that you've had. And it would probably be foolish of me to not ask while we're still recording if you would be interested in maybe joining us again sometime, because I think everyone can agree an hour with you has not been enough.
Well, thank you, Doug. This has been a rare pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you. To everyone who has joined today, we thank you for giving of your time, especially across numerous global time zones. If there are any additional questions or follow-ups to this presentation, you can certainly send them in the various electronic platforms by which you were notified of this talk. And don't forget that this presentation has been recorded and will be available for view on my YouTube channel, Nose Under the Tent, in the next few days. Doctor, attendees, thank you all. Have a great day or a good night wherever you happen to be.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Doug. Bye-bye.